And now, Working Man Radio with your host, Joe Lyles.
One of the voices heard yesterday in the wake of the court striking down the provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. One of the voices heard was Representative John Lewis, a congressman from the great state of Georgia. John Lewis has the distinction of being one of the marchers who marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama in 1965. They marched for voting rights. They marched to register people to vote. They were attacked by officers with the Alabama Highway Patrol. Many were beaten. John Lewis himself was beaten with a billy stick. Some say he nearly died. And he went from the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That was the spur. That was the spur that caused Congress to act and pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That was the spur that sent Lyndon Johnson down to Congress to deliver a special to address a joint session of Congress on the issue of voting rights. And it was the spur that got the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed. John Lewis went on to become a congressman from Georgia. Not only did he win the right to vote that day, he wound up becoming serving as a congressman in the United States Congress. Some would call him a living symbol of the importance of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Lyndon Johnson regarded the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as one of his most important achievements. Lyndon Johnson thought that the Voting Rights Act was more important than the Civil Rights Act of 1964, passed a year earlier. In fact, when it came time to talk about what should we do first, Lyndon Johnson said we should do voting rights first. Lyndon Johnson is famously quoted in private conversation as saying that if you make sure that black folks have the right to vote, he said, you'll have Strom Thurmond kissing every black ass in South Carolina. It kind of never worked out quite that way, but you see his point. Politicians have a habit of respecting the rights and dignity and privileges and respecting dignity? The dignity of the people who have the right to vote and can vote them out. Nothing like being able to call your congressman home and say, we know what, we're going to replace you with somebody we like better. This is one of these great things people talk about, how, the power of incumbency and it's hard to get rid of a congressman and the power of money and blah, blah, blah. But let me tell you something. Congressmen get defeated for re-election from time to time. It happens. Senators get defeated for re-election from time to time. It happens. It is the saving grace of our representative democracy that, however infrequent it might be, and of course it is infrequent. Somebody gets elected and people like the job he's doing, and most of what Congress people do, most people don't really even know what their congressperson does. That's the truth. I mean, a lot of what Congress people do, there are a lot of things they do that have nothing to do with what they vote on. One of the secrets that Jesse Helms used to use, y'all know who Jesse Helms was. Jesse Helms was one of the most was a dinosaur, the last of a breed. There were actually lots of U.S. senators like Jesse Helms back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Richard Russell from Georgia was a notorious white supremacist, and I mean a white supremacist, a racist, a true racist. A racist is somebody who believes that one race is inherently superior and should be permitted to rule over another. That's what racism is. That's why I don't use the term. Most people who you call racist are just bigots. It's not that they think that this race is inherently inferior. It's that they think they are cultural bigots. It's not that they are genetically inferior. It's merely that they need to adopt our cultural habits. They need to be more like us. That's bigotry. Richard Russell was a racist, a white supremacist. He believed in segregation, had defended it, had tried to stop the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and when Jesse Helms was elected to the Senate in 1972, he was a reactionary. He was a throwback to a breed of U.S. senator that was less and less common. One of the things that Jesse Helms used to do when he was a U.S. senator, one of the things he was rated highest on was constituent service. If your mama was having trouble getting her Social Security started, you wanted to call Jesse Helms's office. His staff would get on it. They would get your problem solved. That's one of the things that congressmen and senators do, and they do it precisely because that's the kind of thing that creates people who will reelect you. They don't know a tip of the iceberg of the stuff that Congress votes on. But they know when they have a problem with the federal government that your congressman, and by the way, this is true for everybody, it's true for you. If you need something from the federal government, get on the phone to your congressman. Send a letter to your congressman. Call them up. Somebody will answer your call. They will do something to help you because that's where votes to reelect them come from. John Lewis said something last night. He has a phrase. He kept talking about the right to participate in the democratic process. That's what he kept saying. I heard him say that 3 or 4 times. He was on several shows last night, and I heard the phrase 3 or 4 times. We were talking about the right to participate in the democratic process. John Lewis, God bless him, because I'm a big fan and I like him a lot. And if he were my congressman, I would vote to reelect him without question or pause. But he has understated the case. He is not making people understand what we're talking about when we talk about the right to vote. This is what we're talking about. The question is, do you have anything to say about the laws you are expected to obey? Right? The legislature makes the laws. The legislature decides what the punishment is for violating the laws. The legislature decides what remedies are available to you in civil actions in court. The legislature decides what your rights are, what your privileges are, what your obligations are. The legislature decides how much taxes you pay. And the question is, do you have anything to say about who makes those decisions? The question is, are we living, the question is the consent of the governed. Right? What did Thomas Jefferson write in 1776? Governments are instituted among men and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. If you live under a government and you can't vote, you are being governed without your consent. That's what we're talking about. That's what tyranny is. It's being told these are your obligations and you don't have and we're taking some of your rights away, and oh, by the way, you have nothing to say about this. That's what we're talking about. And that's the way it existed in the South for 100 years after the Civil War. Black people were expected to obey laws. Black people were regularly hung and put in the electrical chair for violating laws. They had nothing to say about the creation of those laws. That's what we're talking about. It's tyranny. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. You've been listening to Working Man Radio with Joe Lyle at joelylesradio.com.